Welcome to Guerrilla Discipleship. I'm your host, Kevin Baker. Great to be with you again this week, and appreciate you being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship. I hope it is encouraging you and equipping you to get into the harvest field. And we're following up on a conversation that we started last week. Diane wrote into us and wanted to know about spiritual warfare. And we've been talking about spiritual warfare in general, but also as it applies to being a disciple who makes other disciples. And really, again, grateful for Diane's question. And one of the things that I talked about last week, just to review in case you didn't see it, was that basically spiritual warfare is real, but it's nothing for us to fear. The enemy is always trying to distract us and put obstacles up that keep us from being obedient to what God has for us, and especially when we partner with God in kingdom building and helping to spread and multiply His kingdom out. Obviously, the enemy of God doesn't want to see His glory expanded and people rescued from sin and hopelessness, and so there is going to be some difficulties that come with that. I had mentioned that in Luke 10 and Matthew 10, where Jesus is calling the disciples and then sending them out. Luke 10, I just want to refresh your memories on this. Luke 10 says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of Him to every town and place where He was about to go. He told them, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into His harvest field. Go, I am sending you like lambs among wolves.'" And Matthew says the same thing. And Matthew says, "Because I'm sending you," where Jesus says, "I'm sending you as lambs or sheep among wolves." Matthew adds, "So be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." And so we do need to be wise about spiritual warfare and wise about every aspect of our life as much as God gives us the grace. And so I want to just set the tone that spiritual warfare is a real issue, and that we all face it, and spiritual warfare affects us whether we're engaged with the kingdom or not. In fact, spiritual warfare, the whole goal of spiritual warfare is to keep us from being engaged in the kingdom as followers of Jesus and then as obedient disciple makers and kingdom builders. So it's not like I don't want you to think that, well, if I just don't do anything for the Lord, then I don't have to worry about spiritual warfare. You are actually on the losing end of spiritual warfare if you don't align yourself with the King of Kings, because He has told us that greater is He that is in us. The Spirit that He's put in us is greater than the one that's in the world. And so we want to be on the side of walking with Jesus because we have nothing to fear. In fact, in Matthew's gospel, when He gives us that great commission and sends us out, He says, "I'll always be with you. I'm with you to the very end of the age, always there." And so we want to be in the center of God's will. We want to be obedient to what God's asking us to do, because that's really the safest place for us to be. That's the place where the power and the presence of God is. And so the enemy cannot even stand in the presence of God, cannot even approach the presence of God. So we want to be engaged in that, but we will find ourselves experiencing spiritual warfare as we walk with God and as we serve God. And I made the case that primarily we have two weapons that there are two weapons that the enemy often uses in our life. They're his favorite weapons. The Bible describes them to us in Joshua chapter 1, when Joshua is taking over for Moses, and God kind of reminds him of what he needs to be aware of. And here's what the Bible says in Joshua chapter 1, starting with verse 7. He says, "Be strong and very courageous." So here's what the enemy loves to do. The enemy loves to stir up fear, and he loves to stir up discouragement. God goes on to say, "Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." You see, faithfulness is all God's ever requiring us. He will make us prosperous and successful. But then verse 9, he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. There it is. There's fear. We talked about that last week. And then he says, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So we want to talk about discouragement today. It is, I think, a huge weapon that the enemy uses to derail and to defeat or try to defeat those of us who are in ministry in some way, serving God in some way. Discouragement, of course, isn't just something that we who are in ministry experience. Everybody can experience and does experience discouragement. But the enemy loves, I think, to try to discourage the followers of Jesus. And let's just start with a definition. I think discouragement is, well, it's a lack of confidence, or a loss, I should say, not a lack of, but it's a loss of confidence. You were feeling confident and now you're not. That discouraged feeling. It's a loss of enthusiasm. Man, I was so excited. And the enemy just loves to come in some way and discourage us. So we go from excited about the Lord to, ugh. And then it's a loss of hope. I think those are some of the aspects of what discouragement feels like. It's a loss of courage, if you will, a discouragement. I felt courageous, I felt hopeful and confident and excited, and now I feel the loss of that. So I say this, I've been pastoring for almost 40 years, and I would say that most pastors have at least seasons of discouragement. Some pastors probably are in perpetual discouragement. And for a variety of reasons. And you would think, if you look at the life of Jesus, there was so much that could have led Jesus to be discouraged. He faced so many obstacles. The enemy here he gets baptized. Think about this. In the scriptures tell us that Jesus has this great moment of baptism. John baptizes him. The Father claims him as his own. The Spirit descends and rests on him. It's a high moment. And then the Spirit of God, pay attention to this, the Spirit of God leads Jesus into the desert to be tempted. And so I want you to kind of understand that after moments of great spiritual highs will often come spiritual lows. The enemy is working on us and wants to discourage us. And so don't be shocked if you see an advancement of some type and God opens a new door or something great sort of starts happening. You feel this great enthusiasm and excitement about what God's doing. Be on guard, because discouragement perhaps will be right behind you. And there are lots of reasons that we get discouraged. Again, the enemy loves to discourage us because I disengage when I get discouraged. I tend to step back and I think, what's the use? Why am I even working at this? Why do I even try? Every time I try, it goes poorly or nothing happens or whatever. And that kind of brings me to the first cause, I think, that we need to be aware of for discouragement. And I would say that's unmet expectations. I need my expectations to be in line with reality. And this is a hard place to walk because I want to be faithful and I don't want to be cynical. I don't want to be pessimistic. I want to believe God's going to do. He says, he promises that those of us who follow him and obey him and are empowered by his Spirit will do greater things than he did. And so I should have great expectations, but I've got to temper them always over the long haul. Sometimes my expectations are that this moment, great things are going to happen, or this season, great things are going to happen. And we don't take the long view. And again, when you have a spiritual high, a breakthrough, you got an invite. I have a friend who recently got invited to speak to a group of leaders, and he was it just felt like God was opening doors for him, and he sort of chased that, right? He was like, man, this door, I think, is just confirmation from God, and then this door is going to possibly open up some other doors. Well, he was just very excited, spiritual high, and so that went on for a week or so, and then unfortunately he got the call back from the person who had invited him and said that he was in another meeting, and he got uninvited. Now, it wasn't about him. They had decided to go in a different way, but my friend took this incredibly personally. Like, God, why did you let me get my hopes up? Why was I on such a, why even offer or allow this offer to come at all if it was only going to be grasped and taken away from me? And so we often have unmet expectations in ministry. Ministry is hard. Again, look at the Gospels. Look at what Jesus experienced. He was prepared for great discouragement because he knew the hearts of people. He knew how fickle our hearts were. In John chapter 6, here's just some of the titles, some of the titles that this Bible enters in. John chapter 6 starts with Jesus feeding the 5,000. Remember, that's not just 5,000. That was 5,000 men. So there were women and children in addition. So easily 15, 20,000 people. Jesus feeds. What a miraculous thing. The disciples are overwhelmed. Then he walks on water. I mean, holy mackerel. Then he begins to talk to the disciples and the crowds about who he is. And here's the last title in John chapter 6. Starts right between verses 59 and 60 in this particular Bible, and it says, many disciples desert Jesus. And here's verse 60 of chapter 6. On hearing it, that is, Jesus' teaching about who he really is, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? And so by the end of the chapter, Jesus has gone from this amazingly spiritual high to many people walking away, and he's sort of back down to just the 12. And even those 12 feel like maybe they're on very tenuous ground. So those are the things that we can have. We can have a great spiritual conversation. Maybe some coworker comes in and says, hey, you're a Christian, aren't you? I would love for you to, and they seem so hungry for the gospel, so eager to talk about it, maybe even on the precipice of giving their life to Christ. And you go home and you say to your spouse or your friends, man, I just had a great day today. I feel like so-and-so was so spiritually hungry, and I feel like they're going to come to know the Lord. And then, you don't have another conversation, and 2 or 3 days later find out that they have no spiritual interest at all, and you just feel so discouraged because you had such hopes. So we need to be careful with our expectations. God is doing a work. He's at work all the time. And all he asks from us is faithfulness. Imagine how discouraged, John the Baptist was. He got imprisoned and he was confused. In fact, he ends up losing his head. He's executed in prison. And he's like, is this the way this was supposed to work out? He perhaps had a different thought about what God had in store for him. And Peter himself was disappointed in his own he didn't meet his own expectations. Peter had declared to Jesus, I'll never betray you, never turn my back on you. I'm willing to die with you and for you. And Jesus says, in just a few hours, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And he did. And so now Peter's discouraged in himself. And that we can get that, right? We are doing such a great thing, and all of a sudden we fall back into a sin, or we slip into something, and we just realize how, man, I still have so much to go. And so now I'm discouraged about myself. I'm not necessarily discouraged about God or circumstances. Now I just feel like, wow, who am I to be doing this? I fail, and failures can lead that. And we're all going to have failures, right? And so if we have this idea that we're as we follow God, that we'll never have difficulties or we're never going to have failures, then we can easily get discouraged. But ministry is full of failures, and God's often teaching us something in our failures. He's showing us his reliability. Sometimes God is bringing us to the end of ourselves in our failures. We've been trying to do the work in our own strength. The Bible says in Psalm 27, that unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor in vain. Well, if you've been trying to build ministry, build disciple making, maybe see your church grow, whatever it is, your Bible study grow, people come to know the Lord, you've been trying to do that in your own strength, you're going to end up, God's going to allow you to come to the end of that, because really nothing great can happen out of our strength. Let me just say this also, and the disciples seem to be oblivious to this, but Jesus was very keen on this. Another place that discouragement comes is exhaustion. The needs of people, Jesus told his disciples when he sent them out in Luke 10 and Matthew 10, when he sent them out, he said, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the leper, proclaim the kingdom. Can I tell you, it's exhausting, right? And there are plenty of times in the Gospels where you see Jesus and the disciples ministering, and Jesus pulls them away because they didn't have enough sense to know when they were exhausted. They were living off these spiritual highs, but their bodies and their minds and their emotions were exhausted. And Jesus knew they needed to come. He's like a good shepherd, right? He leads us to quiet waters. And so sometimes we in the ministry can, those especially doing full-time ministry, can get ourselves exhausted. The needs of people. We've had, a bunch of funerals, a hard board meeting. We've preached a couple of times and led a Bible study. We've had all these preps for sermons and Bible studies and meetings, and we're just exhausted, but the meetings and the needs and the ministry keeps going. You can get exhausted almost more when ministry is succeeding, because the more you have success in ministry, the more demands on you. And often the more you have to figure out how to do things in new ways. You can't lead a 600-person church at the same way that you led a 200-person church. You can't lead a 2,000-member church the same way you did a 600-person church. And so you have to keep remaking yourself. And this is exhausting work. This is spiritually draining, to be poured out. And that's what Jesus said. We're being poured out. Paul said that. And as you pour out, if we don't keep up with the Spirit of God pouring in, if we don't keep renewing in, then we begin to get exhausted and burnt out. And in that, the enemy comes and discourages us with just thoughts of discouragement, just a whisper in our minds. Why are you even doing this anyway? Maybe your church was growing and you felt so good about it for the last few weeks, and then all of a sudden a staff member quits, or there's a conflict in the board, and you just see all of a sudden the attendance slipping, and you see the enthusiasm slipping, or you look at the budget and you say, wow, giving is down. I mean, the economy's hard, but still we can take that personally, and so we get basically just so discouraged by that. And it's even worse when you're already living on fumes, and so many of us are living on fumes. By the way, one of the great works of the enemy is busyness, right? He loves to keep us busy. We're afraid, fear ties into our busyness. We're afraid of missing out. We're afraid that if I don't get this done, bad things are going to happen. If I don't do it now, I'm going to miss out in the future, whatever it is. And so we burn the candle at both ends, as they used to say, and we get ourselves exhausted. And I'm so susceptible to discouragement. And that's why I need to remember that God is a God of rest. He's invited us into his rest. That's why the Sabbath is so important. We ignore it as if, that's for, that's just, not a reality in our lives. But if we don't rest, we'll become exhausted. And when we become exhausted, we are so easily discouraged. Another thing that can happen is frustration, right? When my expectations aren't met, or when people just are not cooperating, or ministry situations get more difficult, we get frustrated, and then I get discouraged. And so you can see there are lots of ways and lots of places where discouragement can enter into ministry. And I believe that's why, first of all, Jesus never sent people out alone, because when I am discouraged, I often need the perspective of someone else. I need someone else to say, hey, let's look at this from a different point of view, because I can get in my exhaustion and in my failures or whatever, I can just get tunnel vision and see it can be all bleak, right? I become Eeyore. There's just a big cloud above me. And I need someone with fresh eyes to come and remind me maybe of the promises of God. Remind me of, wait a minute, this is a difficult season, but look at how much good has happened. We can get so limited in our view and in our perspective, that the enemy just comes in. And discouragement, like I said, discouragement it's hard to serve when you're discouraged. It's hard to obey when you're discouraged. It's difficult to pour yourself into something that you feel like, what's the use? And the enemy loves to get us to what's the use. He'll show us the chaos in the world. He'll show us it, and the news sometimes can just amplify the negatives, right? You amplify the negatives when all kinds of things are positive, because that's what's making news. In a time where everything is really bad, in a season maybe when we were in war or really experiencing a difficult season, then what makes news is good things. Hey, let me just say, there's a bright spot in the midst of this gloom we're living in. But when things are going good, the news is often highlighting negatives, and the news in our culture is really a very negative force for us for a variety of reasons. And so we've got to be aware of that. We've got to be aware of our own physical limitations. Jesus was aware of his physical limitations. He slept, he ate, he rested. He was aware of the disciples' physical limitations. But we tend to push ourselves. It's not that God is pushing us into that, and we blame him. We can certainly turn around and say, God, you look at, I just can't keep up with everything that needs to be done. And I wonder how many times the Lord is saying to us, I didn't ask you to do that. Because Jesus said that his burden was light, his yoke was easy. And so when we are ministering in a way that it doesn't feel like the burden is light and the yoke is easy, then maybe we've taken a yoke on that God never intended for us to wear. Maybe we've taken a burden on that God didn't give us, but we've given to ourselves. Many of us are burdened by things that God doesn't want us. He freed us from those kinds of burdens. We're burdened by shame and guilt, and God said, my grace is the answer to all of that. I have set you free. You live in my love, not because you perform well, but because I've chosen to call you my sons and daughters, and to offer you forgiveness and grace. It's a free gift, and you just get to receive it and now live in the beauty of that. So we need people to remind us, and we need to be mindful of exhaustion, failures, unmet expectations, frustrations that are basically the ripe soil for the enemy to discourage us. And some of us can get so discouraged we'll drop out of ministry. Lots of pastors get so discouraged. Maybe because their expectations of what pastoring was going to be like, or maybe they poured themselves into doing everything they knew how, and the church is still dying, or the church is not growing, and they're hearing nothing but criticisms. I understand that. This is not an easy task, and we need people on our side. We need people in our circle. None of us should be doing ministry alone, and that includes pastors. Pastors need someone that they trust enough to really just be open enough to say, I feel like I'm failing, or I don't know what to do. And without that, man, I don't know how you make it through. And you and I need that as followers of Jesus who are just simply trying to be relationally open to God doing spiritual things. We get our heart set on maybe this is going to really be a conversation that God's going to use, and then it doesn't go where we wanted it to, and our expectations are met. Or maybe we flubbed it up. Maybe God set up a perfect conversation and we let fear get the best of us, and we didn't open our mouths. We knew God was inviting us to a conversation or to pray for that person or whatever it was, and we ended up just failing miserably. And now we just have so much discouragement about ourselves, like I'll never do this right or whatever. All of those things are basically lies from the enemy. And we have to work that out with God. We have to listen to what God is saying about us. And can I tell you this? God will never say a discouraging word about you. He will be honest with you about yourself, but it will not be a word of discouragement about you, because God is not ever discouraged about you. God is full of love about you. And so it's the enemy that knows if I can discourage them, they'll disengage, they'll drop it, they'll stop it, they'll give up. That's why the Bible encourages us, persevere. Paul poured that message into young Timothy. Persevere. Don't give up doing good. We've got to continue to be faithful, but that doesn't mean that we don't take a break, that we don't rest, that we don't realize when we are exhausted. So let's not let discouragement take hold. That's the peak. We're going to feel discouraged, and we need to open up and maybe say to one of our prayer partners, man, I'm kind of discouraged about where ministry is. I'm discouraged about my own faithfulness. Whatever you're discouraged about, share that, because Jesus has been very clear. The Bible is very clear. We get to share these things with one another, confess these things to one another so that we might be healed and the burdens might be lifted and we can walk together. So yes, in answer to this whole thing, is spiritual warfare real? Yeah. By the way, keep in mind that the people you're ministering to are going to experience fear and discouragement as well. And you need to be on the lookout for their discouragement, because maybe they've given their life to Christ and they thought their marriage was going to automatically get better. Or they gave their life to Christ and they thought, oh, they would never be tempted by sin again. They had unrealistic expectations. And so you need to open the door, create a vulnerable atmosphere where those that you're discipling and ministering to can actually come to you with their discouragement. If not, what will happen is they'll disengage from you. They will start backing up. And by the way, their discouragement will end up leading to your discouragement. So this is not something just for us and that we experience. The people that we're pouring our lives into will be discouraged, especially the young believers, those who have not got a lot of experience with the Lord, because who knows what failures and exhaustion and unmet expectations they're experiencing, the frustrations, because they had you see this in the disciples. They had totally unrealistic expectations about Jesus. He kept trying to rework them and say, you don't understand, I have to die. Their thought was, oh my gosh, this is our new political leader. He's going to free the nation of Israel. We're going to be on top of these Romans. And he just kept saying, no, you've got it wrong. That's not the kingdom work that I'm doing. And so he kept working them. And they were greatly discouraged because of the cross. But Jesus said, you will be discouraged. You'll have this moment when you're going to grieve like you've never grieved before, but your grief will turn to joy. And their grief did turn to joy because Jesus met them. And so let's be real about this. Walking around acting like you never get discouraged is not realistic. Everybody gets discouraged. Everybody gets exhausted. Everybody has unmet expectations. Everybody fails. And you need to teach this and model this for your disciples. Those two big things. Now, there's lots more that we can talk about in terms of spiritual warfare, but I wanted to just hit those two biggies, fear and discouragement. Watch for it in yourself. And watch for it in the lives of those who you are ministering with, because the enemy wants to stop the growth of the kingdom any way that he can. But here's the great thing. He is powerless against our God. Our God is greater. His power is greater. His promises are faithful and true. And so we have nothing to worry about. We get to live in the power and in the grace of our Lord. So thank you again for being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship. Keep on making disciples. Keep on having spiritual conversations. Keep praying for your family and friends, and keep opening the door for God to do great work. And come back again next week, and we'll continue to talk about how we can be the kind of people that God wants to use. So thank you for being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship, and we'll see you next week.